Hello, and I'm your host, Sean Millerick, joined tonight by Ely Sussman, and this is Marlins After Dark. Why? Because no team keeps you up late at night like the Miami Marlins. And unfortunately, after a few, no, more than a few feel-good months, they're back to doing that again, keeping you up late, scratching your head with tonight's shocking news that the Marlins have moved on from their general manager, Kim Ng. The and a just decision that I feel a lot of us were probably largely bewildered by. But Eli, how are you doing? And what was your initial reaction to this news as it came out?
Thank you for having me on again. At least my third, maybe my fourth appearance on Marlins After Dark in my history. Not only keeping us late at night, but waking us early in the morning for situations like this. So yeah, an unexpectedly busy day processing this, trying to make sense of it. And yeah, I feel it's been the Marlins at the center of attention. There was, for people outside of the Marlins universe, remarking that it's unusual for news like this to break in the midst of the postseason on a day when there are two postseason games going on. The league generally likes to stay away from that. That's just the way that this circumstance played out in terms of making the call on the actual contract that Kim was signed to. So that it didn't have to go down to the wire the way it did, but that's how it played out. And yeah, even during the course of the day, I don't think my opinion on it has changed all that much. I try to see it from both Bruce and Kim's sides, but ultimately, it's an unwelcome change, drastic change that they're going through, coming off such a thrilling, satisfying season that we went through. Now, the next steps there, it's a setback. It's kind of an intentional, not an intentional, but it's an unwelcome setback before they kind of proceed with what was already kind of an uncertain future that this Marlins team was facing. It's now even more complicated as they try to go through this change. And so even though the day has played out, there's been good reporting as to why exactly we wound up in this situation. There's still a lot of questions to be answered, hopefully by Bruce Sherman himself in the near future, about how we got into this uncomfortable spot.
Yeah, I'll say that I was surprised, but at the same time, there's always that kind of sense I feel as a Marlins fan. Like, are you ever really surprised when something like this transpires? I was part of the crowd trying to push some people back off the ledge. I know the last couple of weeks, as there started to be some growing concern about the lack of extension, to this point. And I was definitely part of the group of, well, they usually do these things after the playoffs, all news. It's a stupid policy, sure, but wait for the season to be fully over to make these decisions. And just kept thinking in my head that they couldn't do this. They couldn't do this again, rob themselves of this opportunity to get really any full positive momentum, or at least the full positive momentum that they could from a previously successful season. And I've written two pieces today already. One already ran on Call of the Pen. The other one drops for Here's the Pitch tomorrow. The Here's the Pitch one has to serve as kind of a retraction of a piece I wrote a couple of weeks ago, just celebrating the fact that despite getting swept by the Phillies, you felt really great about the Marlins having this strong foundation, perhaps stronger than it had been in decades, going forward into future seasons. You have Skip in place, manager of the year candidate. Arizona's making that look a little dubious, but hopefully still Skip has a shot at pulling that award down. And you felt great about all the moves that Ng made to get us to this point, and just the season that she had all the trades or were pulled off at the deadline, and just like the organization's in good hands, the decision making, and even Sherman to an extent did those kind of increases in payroll, improve the extra money to get Soler, to get Berger, to get Robertson during the season. And it's like, all right, moving along in the right direction. We can build on this. And then it's just so much of that capital has to be burned before November. Every time there's been a positive season, something else has happened to kind of yank the ball away. And it's just like, why do you keep doing this? How can he not see that? Like, this is not like managing stocks or something, or like running a regular business. Sports fans are not rational people. The people who you want to buy season tickets, going forward, they're not rational beings. They stay up late at night watching things like this to scrutinize their team and weigh these decisions. And I, I just don't know how you can keep doing this. So yeah, frustrated for sure. I guess would be where I have landed initially. A little calmed down throughout the day, kind of, but maybe a little scorched earth a bit. And the first thing I wrote this morning, measured, a little more measured mid afternoon, and here just landed on frustrated and disgruntled. Certainly, there's things that I know Aang has a. If you weigh all the check boxes of her job, there's avenues that the Marlins have struggled at. They can't develop a hitter to save their lives, but um, still would have thought that maybe that's another department. Maybe that's scouting. Maybe that's player development that gets overhauled. Why did it need to be Aang? Um, I don't know. Why do you think it needed to be Aang?
Well, it didn't need to be if we're to believe all the reporting that has come out. That Bruce was interested in still having her around in a prominent role. He was just he felt it was imperative to add another, I guess, experienced and really accomplished executive above her on the hierarchy in order to like keep them moving in the right direction. I don't know how much communication they had during the year. Apparently, this came up after the season. Um, it would have been something that I guess she'd be more receptive to entering the season before actually having such a successful year by anybody's expectations coming into this. But it's uh, yeah, it's what you kind of laid out there is this was not an impeccable track record that she had. And because of those issues when it comes to player development and also when it comes to spending Bruce's money in the most direct way through free agency, like her track record was very mixed and in some cases worse than mixed in certain areas. There were going to be adjustments needed to be made in this front office one way or another moving forward because it did not look sustainable. What they did this year was not sustainable as much fun as it was. And I think anybody could accept that. At the same time, this is supposed to be the ultimate meritocracy. When you win, the person most responsible for putting together that winning team, there's generally supposed to be a certain amount of respect shown to them and an appreciation shown to them because above all else, that they usually the people beneath them, the players that they acquire, and everybody below Kim, I think was kind of aligned with the fact that they were appreciative for the fact that the team won the way that it did. So when you have a good thing, you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to sink the boat. But even if I guess you could rock the boat, but the fact that he kind of risked sinking the boat by making this change and taking what the head of the baseball operations and now kind of getting rid of that and starting fresh, the unknown, even though the future in 2024 was already somewhat of a scary place and an unknown for this team. I mean, you're leaning even in a more extreme direction. The kind of risk that you're taking in getting rid of the person that was, most prominently responsible for putting the team for all the positives that came out of this season. Like, I just think the risk here really outweighs whatever incremental benefits it could be attained from like shaking it up in this way. So I understand the general principle of knowing that this was a flawed setup, that this organization was not on really sturdy ground moving forward, despite the way that things went this year. Uh, there had to be a way to address that while preserving the person that I think was most responsible for the improvement that they made in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I mean, I think it's fair to give even some maybe like some C grades or lower on some aspects again of player development, but trades, I feel like that's an A. Getting players that kind of fit this dynamic that works so well for them, like helping build this locker room. Certainly, Skip's in there every day. He gets the lion's share there, but Kim was able to go and get these, players that were so useful. The part of I can't help but wonder about, and this is, I just hope this isn't too black helicopter tinfoil hat on it, but so one of the arguments like out there is proof that Bruce wanted to hold on to her is that this mutual option was exercised, but that option was agreed to previously. Like she had so like proved that she was worth more than that, honestly, like on the market. And I'm just kind of finding myself wondering, like, all right, so that's just kind of like a surface gesture, right? Like, why would she accept just a 1 year extension? Why would she
Right.
operate this season underneath
Yeah,
those
the
conditions?
fact that the team statement even bothered, like, to reinforce the idea that she declined the option, that it worked in that it had a decent portion of our audience. If I was to, like, guesstimate, I'd say at least 10%, maybe as many as 15 or 18% of the audience perceived that to think, well, she left them. This was her moving on
No.
from this organization. She didn't want to be here. No, that was just a formality at the end. No, neither side. The mutual option for an executive contract is just as useless as a mutual option for a player contract. Those are never picked up either way, either. Even though what they represent, understandably, that both sides are unsure about each other, but it never really aligns that way. And it just doesn't make any for somebody in her prominent position working on a 1 year deal. Neither side really would have wanted that, regardless of how this year went. So it was just a formality at the end of it. That I guess it does a little bit of work for the team on the PR front, making it seem like she was the one that was ready to move on. And I mean, that's just the reality is that it was on both sides. The fact that Bruce was that he I don't he had this idea that she still had more to prove, or that she was he could find somebody else that was more capable of making the lead baseball decisions, and that she certainly felt that she had shown enough this year to continue doing that. Just that the matter of just continuing to do what she had already done, whether that came with an elevated title or not. Yeah, the whole principle that he was pushing to have her drop from number one in the decision making rankings to number two, and what effectively would have served as a promotion. That's Yeah, that was kind of an irreconcilable difference. And I don't know where that disconnect really came from. So again, that's up to him to address more specifically. I don't think his statement really answered much of
No.
anything. And the actual transaction that was made with her declining the option, I don't think she was eager to leave. But understandably, with at least one big job open in Boston, and I guess you could call that Mets job a pretty prestigious number two job. If she's going to be a number two somewhere, better to be with the Mets than with the Marlins. Perhaps that's a little debatable,
You
but
get to
yeah,
stick it to Bruce if you take the Mets job more easily
right.
than the.
So yeah, I wish her. We've already done so, but I obviously wish her success wherever she goes, and whether it comes this off season or if it comes the subsequent off season, she is going to be in pretty high demand to fill a similar job to what she already had. So the Marlins better be willing to. Bruce better be willing to understand that now she's gonna very soon she's going to be part of the competition, and if he felt that she had serious shortcomings in her role right now, I mean, those are going to be challenged very directly in the near future when she's probably working in that same position with a different major league team.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly we wish her all the best as well. It's the most confident I've felt in a front office executive for the Marlins probably since Larry Beinfest. Honestly, I mean, a name we're going to mention. I actually was high on for about one season and wouldn't necessarily mind if he returns. Yeah, we'll probably mention Michael Hill a little bit in some of those rumors, but I've been the highest on Ang the last couple of seasons since she was freed from this, Derek Jeter's shadow, overseeing things as anyone since Beinfest's tenure, prime Beinfest. I've made not the after years. It's Michael Hill is a name I've thought of even before those rumors, though, because if you go back to Ang's hiring, something I keep thinking of is that and kicking that around with a saying on a OTV show I've been re-binging. There's a saying, and it's probably happened outside of the show, saying that if you meet an asshole in the morning, then you've just met an asshole. If you meet assholes all day, you're the asshole. And it's going to and just thinking of Sherman's reaction with these GMs who have kind of decided to bet on themselves and have had these wildly successful seasons. Hill is nearing the end of his tenure with the Marlins, entering 2020, and the Marlins made the playoffs in a greatly expanded, watered down format that no one likes to really count. Sherman likes to count it though. He was the owner while the Marlins made the playoffs in 2020, and Hill really put on a kind of amazing performance that season with the team as a COVID outbreak at the start of it, all the transactions that needed to take place to get a competitive team that was successful on the field. Team makes the playoffs, and then again, we're moving on from Hill, and then Derek Jeter is kind of there to take that bullet. Clash of personalities. We all make decisions as a committee. It's not any one person. He's not really worth all that money. And look at his track record, from before. And then but that was okay. We wrote that off, sure. And then once Jeter left too, it's like, all right, like maybe that was just a isolated thing. And Ang had a great resume and came in and started to have success. But now we're doing it again. If we're just seeing another GM who kind of maxed out their value, then moved on. It just kind of makes me wonder if there really is just a ceiling on what Bruce Sherman is willing to spend on a GM. There's only so much of the budget allocated to front office personnel, just the same as there is only so much money to be allocated, and it's just the reality of the situation to on the field personnel. I know as a fan, I've kind of often hoped that maybe at least all the non-player apparel stuff would be different. That we could at least maybe have the nicest analytics department, or the nicest scouting department, or the nicest most compensated managers and coaches. If we can't spend all that much on the field, then maybe money spreads wider off the field. But maybe that's not the case. Do you think there's anything to that? Is there just only so much that Bruce is going to pay a GM? Do you think that the next GM will make more than Ang would have made this season? Might be the simplest way to put the question.
I don't feel like that was a significant factor here. It's worth reminding people that Kim was a Jeter choice, a Jeter hire, signed off from Bruce, but there wasn't really much of a search process 3 years ago to replace Mike Hill. It was Jeter saying that, well, I know her. I played under her. She has an extensive resume. She's overqualified to be a GM. And that was it. And as long as she was willing to do it, and she needed some convincing to do it. But once she was on board, that opportunity was there, and she went after it. But that was Jeter motivated, and he's not here anymore. So even if the results were here this year, I don't know if philosophically he was quite on the same page as she was. For all of her strengths as a leader and all of her experience in baseball, not an overly analytical manager in terms of the way that other smaller market front offices run their business compared to the Rays or the Orioles, or even, I guess you could compare to a lot of other bigger market teams as well. That overall, as best as we could quantify it, it feels like the Marlins are still below average in terms of how it is that they utilize data at all levels of their organization, majors and minors. And maybe that contributed to still some of the ways that they're a little deficient. The fact that she ended up building a team this year that almost punting on the idea of hitting home runs. And you end up putting together a team that overall they won games, but they did ball scoring the fewest runs in the National League. And they won in spite of that, not because of that. They won in spite of that.
Right.
And all across the minor leagues, where that stuff is becoming increasingly analytical in terms of finding ways to uncover under the radar players and establishing best practices for how these players should be able to improve their games, both during the season and during the offseason, how they train down there. And there's really no way to sugarcoat it how poorly things have gone in terms of developing hitters, even when they've had such high draft picks. Um, they've just had these guys that were so widely highly touted and trusted to develop into decent hitters, and we're at a place where you can use all the caveats you want. The state of the farm system right now is unacceptable for a small market team. It's one of the very worst farm systems in baseball, and it's there's just not a lot of individual players of any type, especially on the hitting side, that you feel like are going to be um, successors to some of these veteran players that are either hitting free agency now or will hit free agency very soon. So they're a team that's already struggling offensively, and uh, she's over the last few years. It doesn't seem like there's been any sort of answer in terms of preparing these young hitters, seeing growth among these young hitters. It's so few and far between these guys that are actually improving there and like flashing everyday player upside as well. It's a defensible stance. If we are to read into it, that Bruce might want somebody else that has a different background when it comes to that, in ways to actually leverage data to make players better and to put together teams that score more runs, especially at the major league level. But I'll still contend that Kim was part of the solution here, that she was a big net positive, and there should have been ways to continue adding to this front office without subtracting her or without putting her in a position where she felt so disrespected that left her with no other choice. It's any way you look at it, it's still disappointing that we've reached this inflection point where you're taking a step backwards, and now you're just hoping that you could put the pieces together again in a way that is better. But for the meantime, you're a step behind almost every other organization, because you're entering this very important offseason with a void in your front office.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if this could have been avoided as simply as, so if it was going into this season, if it was a mutual option for 2024, if like they could have just had to start before opening day 2023, just, if they had offered then to, how about we just guarantee that for 2024? We just guarantee that extra year. I often applaud the policy of kind of giving players these kind of prove-it type contracts for a smart market club for on the field situations. And I think it worked out great for Jorge Soler, who kind of had that deal with opt-outs every season. But for people who could become such an impactful long-term elite type presence, like a like a manager, a general manager, a superstar player, for that kind of ceiling, that I just think you need to get that locked down as soon as possible, not let them get to the walk year. So it's just wish it could have been avoided. They could have just, I don't know, why is DJ Savilik still employed, or or they could have other positions that could have been replaced or shorn up than this. But it's unfortunate. So I think we've covered, I guess, what would have been my next question of if you agree with this. I mean, we both seem to be on the same page that it would have been best to retain her in some capacity, that there was some way to work around this while still addressing deficiencies. What would have to happen to, I guess, sell this now? Like definitely shoring up these problems ultimately does have to happen, like you said, for a small market team. The 2026 Marlins would have been in trouble if nothing changed, going forward in terms of drafting and development. And also, if whoever is hired, if the Marlins go on to improve and make the playoffs again in 2024, if the Marlins are 14 games over 500 again at the 2024 All-Star break, then no one's going to give a shit about this anymore. We're going to move on very quickly. Impassioned fans, writers, followers. But what would have to happen, I guess, between now and opening day for you to be, sold that? And I guess I'll ask this in two parts. What would sell you, and what do you think would sell the average fan or the average Joe who might go to baseball games in South Florida, that things are fine, things are going smoothly. Like what's the hire that would accomplish that for you?
That's a great question. I yeah, I don't think promoting from within would suffice. They have three assistant GMs in Ozzo Campo, in Dan Greenlee, and the current interim GM is going to be Brian Chadden. So I don't think any of those guys are the answer as the lead decision maker. If we are to believe that Bruce recognized some fundamental issue with the way that they were currently trending, I don't think promoting from within is simply going to accomplish that. So it has to come from outside the organization. Um, I don't know if it necessarily has to be a prior GM. I think there are just surveying the league. There are a lot of interesting assistant GMs on other teams or vice presidents on other teams that bring interesting things to the table. And I think you could be excited about them depending on what direction they go there. So yeah, I wouldn't say that there's any one particular candidate that I'm uh, super laser focused on. I think the name that you'll see brought up most frequently by in speculation is Sig Mejdal of the Orioles. He's their main analytics guy, having
Okay.
previously been with the Astros. Looking around the league, I think you want to focus on teams that seemingly have put together their own sustainable path towards success. So whether it's the Orioles or the Rays or the Astros, um, or any of a few other organizations that seem to have figured it out, like in terms of how to create this assembly line of exciting young players, and a lot of whom have had success translating to the big leagues. And any of those people that seem to be blocked from being a GM on their current teams, would still have that seem to be ready and have worked under the tutelage of effective GMs that that have shown that they can get a lot done with relatively limited resources. There's a lot of candidates that they could go in that particular direction with. I would, and I don't know how transparent the team is going to be about that, but assuming they do go with somebody like that, and it is somebody that's a little bit more analytically inclined than Kim would be, the support has to be there for Bruce in order to actually pay the people, the additional front office manpower that person wants to take with them when it comes to either employing more total analysts in the organization or employing both more analysts and more scouts, or if it comes to investing in other technology that's utilized in the minor leagues to better develop those players, buying certain cameras, buying certain
Right.
evaluation tools. And yeah, so there's only so much of that we're going to actually find out about and be able to like put a number on and be able to actually like notice that's different, that's different, that's different. Um, having like going down this direction though, it's going to be more about just one addition. It's going to have to be that bringing that person and the rest of their posse, or bringing that person and trust that they have an ambitious plan to address whatever it is that Bruce felt was deficient with his current front office, and that will, I think, inevitably require somewhat more of an investment on his front in order to bring in all those kind of ancillary things to build this out. So yeah, there's a few different directions that they could go to feel satisfied about. In terms of from the fans' perspective themselves, coming off the season that they had, you can't go like full throttle into a rebuild right now. There needs to be you need to be creative, but creatively pursue immediate upgrades as well, or retain some of these players who are potential departures in order to give this team a fighting chance to repeat as a postseason team. Um, so that doesn't necessarily mean having to increase payroll again. That'd be a great sign from Bruce if he does do that, and payroll is even higher going into next year. But it's a tough situation because no matter who they bring in, they're not going to magically bring in they don't get to bring prospects with them from their previous organizations, like in their
Right.
suitcase. You need to actually give up something to get those
I was
as
really
well.
hoping Ocampo would be able to do that, but
Right.
just
Yeah.
didn't appear to work out that way.
Yeah, yeah. So the way that I see it's the path to being another 84 win team next year, or anything close to that. It's going to require, I think, it's going to require increasing payroll even more. But I have to be open minded that maybe they do find creative ways to make upgrades without spending money on a ridiculous level. Either way, they need to. Then there needs to be a really earnest effort to get back to the postseason next year after getting it done this year. Despite some of the high profile departures, a lot of the core players definitely are coming back. In terms of wins above replacement, I think with the exception of Sandy, who's hurt, off the top of my head, uh, probably 9 of the top 10 WAR
I think
players
so.
from last year are definitely going to come back with like Soler and even Soler, depending on which WAR you look at. Soler wasn't even all that high up there as a DH who missed a little bit of time. So there, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at here is if going in somewhat of a change of direction with the front office, Bruce really has to lean into that and empower those people to do what they do best. But whatever plan those people have coming in, it has to include being earnest about trying to compete in 2024 after what they did this year. You can't simply turn the page on that, even if you're concerned about the near term strength of this organization. The For all the fans that have already gone ahead and purchased season tickets this year or renewed season tickets because the team made the playoffs and because they assumed that Kim Eng was coming back, to do right by them and to to actually maintain the trust that these fans have put in you. um, there has to be that effort to compete again, just like they did this year.
Yeah, no, certainly competing is a must, and almost feel kind of bad throwing the average fan perception into it because obviously that is going to be largely tied to players. I mean, hey, if the Marlins, if the Marlins go and sign Otani, they can make one of us GM, and ticket sales will be through the roof. But I guess for for me, or for I guess the more scrutinizing diehard fan to be satisfied, then yeah, I think you're going to need to see that big tier name. I mean, I certainly you mentioned getting someone from the Orioles organization. I had Orioles / Rays whiz kid written down on my notes. Like if they can like pull that move, like oh, we're going to be the Rays or the Orioles, and but with that, as you suggested, like, I'm going to want to also then see the fine print news break, and oh, and we're putting $10 million more dollars into analytics and scouting. They're like Bruce bought new computers for 50 new people, to go over go over players and scouting reports. I guess that if they pulled in some rock star name out there, which as far as like if Theo Epstein decided he wanted to move to South Beach, then like I can see that being something that would just blow fans away. They're just that just some bike drop money bag move. That's the only thing of that caliber that I think is really out there. If they were promoting from within, I think it would probably have to be Ocampo just because of those Astros ties. Like that would be the name we can say, oh, well, again, he did it, from this, organization that has had so much success, 7 straight trips to the, ALCS. Maybe he learned something there. But yeah, I'd agree that within is dicey. Even that I think would be kind of met with skepticism. There has to be outside and some signature move that with the resources behind it that makes you think that okay, this really is just about shoring up those player development problems, and this is just about making sure that this is long-term competitive, but that will absolutely need to be married with making sure that this team doesn't just punt on 2024, which again might be tempting in some ways with Sandy out. I mean, you can kind of almost make an argument for just treading water at least and not making a splashy move, which is helped by how weak the free agent class is going to be, aside from Shohei Otani, who's hurt. They attached to it. So it's maybe not the year to make a big splashy move anyway. And so maybe this is about making sure there's just, prospects there that are possibly could help at the end of 2025 or um, 2026. So we mentioned what would the best case would be, what would make us happy. What do you think will happen? What is actually going to happen over the next couple months? Do you think they will do that thing? Has Bruce earned that credibility with you, I guess, that you expect that to happen? Or do you expect just Oscar Campo, Dan Greenleaf, or Brian Chaffin, who I will admit, with some egg on my face, I had not heard of until today. And I'm not completely uninformed. That we'll just be getting the job and we'll be moving forward with that. How do you think this will actually play out over the next couple months?
Yeah, I think he is going to go outside the organization, that they're going to have a more extensive search, certainly, than they had a few years ago to arrive at Kim. I, the thing is, I don't know who else besides Bruce is really going to be involved in making that decision. So for some background on Brian Chadden, he's close to a Marlins lifer. I think his first couple of years of his professional baseball career was elsewhere. He's been since 1998. He has been in the Marlins organization 26 seasons. So about half of his natural life has been spent with the Marlins. It would be a cute story, I suppose, if he takes over as the full-time GM, they like him enough to have endured a couple regime changes already to reach this point as well. But
He's seen every misstep.
yeah,
He's there since '98.
right. So I do think it is kind of a good, a deserved honor for him to be on an interim basis, making inevitably he'll have to make a few decisions with the current team before the new guy is in place. But I do expect it to be outside the organization, from somewhere. Yeah, I don't know if Bruce really has my total trust here. I know that his heart is in the right place. I'll give him credit
I'd
for
agree.
that. Yeah, he is, for the limitations that he has on payroll. He's not going to he's not going to be irrational with doing everything he can to win a championship, but he is emotionally invested in this team on a level that a lot of owners are not. And I think you like to see that he does want to get this right. And yeah, he just apparently had a conviction that the current setup was not going to be sustainable moving forward. So yeah, he'll try to figure something out. As I think my video froze for a moment, but as long as my voice is still here, I'll finish my
Yes.
point. Yeah, I think that he's going to. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a prediction in terms of who exactly he's going to acquire here, but yeah, I do have a feeling that it's going to be somebody whose background is significantly geared towards the analytical side, and somebody that is going to make some significant changes to the way that this team values players for the major league team. And so, yeah, I think there are going to be some intriguing differences to the roster next year, but ultimately it depends on what budget he sets for them to make those changes as well. That's still kind of an unknown here, as to whether he wants to reduce payroll from where it was, or whether he just wanted somebody else in place before loosening taking the training wheels off and actually increasing payroll. Maybe he simply just didn't believe Kim was the right person to handle that responsibility, and he wanted to have his own guy or girl in place to do so instead. So it's going to be different as well. But this is his opportunity to really handpick that person, which was not the case.
Yeah, I mean, definitely he'll be putting his own stamp on this, without question. And just I guess I've sort of taken a couple shots, in his direction. I just want to reiterate. Well, I think you're a feeder can reboots that certainly I don't question his passion for seeing this team succeed. That was evident multiple times this season in a way that is reassuring. But I just also think that it's been evident there's a pretty practical and kind of bottom line efficiency with which he's running this, which I think is commendable on many levels. But I also feel that there's just times where the it gets frustrating to the extent to which he seems myopic, in that regard. And some of these were decisions that kind of get laid at Jeter's feet. Some are laid at Sherman's for just always kind of construing it as that he's just. Sometimes I just think Sherman operates as if he's completely free of any of the sins of the past. And I just go back to again that his customer base are not investors. They're investors of their time, but fans aren't rational beings. We're not rational people. Doing this, following a team this closely, and that the people who he's counting on to financially support this business venture of his just every time there's every time there's a misstep, they're keeping score. Every time that just always seems like this one step forward, two steps back type situation. At the end of the day, it's just going to be about making sure the 2024 team is better than the 2023 team, in which and that can certainly happen with spending less money. The Marlins can make the right trades for the right prospects, this time around, unload some payroll, hit on some developmental magic, and churn out the next superstar. That is, there's a greater than zero possibility of that happening. But at the moment, today, Monday, October 16th, there's I think just frustration is the takeaway of most fans. But last part I just want to touch on is we've kind of danced around it, but how do you see this as impacting the 2024 offseason? Again, that kind of most important chapter in making sure 2024 seems to be seen as a step forward from 2023.
So, I mean, the only recent comp that comes to mind that really sticks out is actually where the Astros were at this time a year ago, where the Astros made it to the postseason, and they made it all the way to the World Series, and people assumed that they would find a way to retain their GM, James Click, but due to what was a personality conflict between him and Jim Crane, they go into the offseason. They keep him hanging for a while. That's what made that situation unusual. They went deep into November without
That's right.
clarity as to what was going to happen with him. And then I think right after the winter meetings, or right around the winter meetings, is when they finally say, "We're not bringing you back." And they start a search then, and they went through most of their offseason even without a full GM. So that was an extreme example. And in that case, their owner, Jeff Crane, like he didn't slow down. He made some pretty big commitments and big decisions even without having a GM in place or just having an acting GM at the time. I don't think this search will go on quite as long, but they are going to, I assume, a significant part of the offseason is going to be passed before they actually get this new person hired, and more importantly, before they actually get settled in. Even if they hire somebody relatively soon, it will take a little while before they're really they're familiar enough with the state of the organization in order to make significant decisions on their own. The first milestone that comes to mind is Jorge Soler, where we expect him to opt out of his deal. From that point, the Marlins do have an opportunity to extend a qualifying offer to him, one that I'm really on the fence about in terms of whether he would take it or not. And I kind of lean towards the fact that he probably would. But that would be a $20.5 million investment in a single year. That's a very big decision. So normally you'd think a team in transition is simply going to pass on that and would rather take a deep breath. And even if they're interested in keeping him, they wouldn't go so bold while they're still in transition. But there are other examples, such as Jeff Crane, and it's probably not the only one, where even before things
It's a
get
good one.
owner has conviction about something in particular, that it being in flux would not stop them from doing so in that regard. So it really does depend exactly how much of the offseason this takes. And frankly, we're just not going to have a super clear timeline until Sherman speaks, which he will do within the next week. He's going to give us more specifics in terms of what he's thinking there. So it's kind of early to project how much of the offseason they're going to be stuck in. limbo for. Um, but yeah, I feel like the Jeff Crane Astros example was kind of an outlier in that usually, in these circumstances, you don't want to be you have to be cynical. You have to think that the reason why you make a change like this, a reason why perhaps he hasn't confirmed this, but a reason why they might be leaning more heavily in someone with an analytics background is that he doesn't want to spend as much money as he did this year, or at least he doesn't want to increase spending moving forward. And he's looking for somebody that can get more done with less than somebody like Kim could. So in that aspect, I think the default has to be that it's not a quiet offseason, but one that is relatively light on free agent spending, one where maybe he'll look for opportunities to dump a few of the substantial contracts they still have on the books. There aren't very many at this point.
No.
From the obvious situation, aside from the obvious situation, the next biggest one is Sandy, and Sandy is not going anywhere at this particular time either. So yeah, so the operating assumption is a big word. I think the best guess is that this is going to be an offseason where they are quiet on the free agent front. And if they are going to make significant headway to address their two or at least two big elephants on the roster at shortstop and catcher, if they are going to address those, they'll do so via creative trades in order to improve there. So that is, yeah, my best guess is that it's going to be another offseason where they try to make these splashy trades like Kim used to do, except they're doing it with less prospect capital than they've had in many years. So I'll be curious. Yeah, it's a big question mark. Even if Kim was staying, there just was not a clear roadblock to address those two big voids on the roster at shortstop and catcher. And I don't know of anybody that they can bring in that magically makes those problems easier to address.
Yeah, I mean even if none of this had transpired today, those were huge questions, right? Because there's really no one available on the free agent market that would just make you feel that would make your heart sing from the jump. The options are terrible at shortstop and catcher, in free agency. The only thing the Marlins really had going for them in that regard is just that the production they got out of shortstop and catcher was so bad in 2023 that I suppose you can make the argument that any improvement would possibly mean a real impact in terms of the wins and losses. But but even then, that's just focusing on offensive production. Wendell was pretty solid defensively, but aside from that, just that any step in the right direction would be good. But other than that, I mean, I guess the first thing I thought of briefly was that this seems like such a big blow and hindrance going into the off season. And I was thinking of I guess it's not quite the disaster like it would be for college football. That's going on right now. It's like the coach, where the head coach essentially is the GM of a college team, and that's just so recruiting is crippled. Nothing's going to take place. You have the NBA at the other end of the spectrum, where it's really just the players testing each other that leads to all major player transactions. Baseball seems like it's happily in the middle, really of maybe that spectrum of events, but probably leaning more towards the situation where you really want that hierarchy in place. I think the biggest takeaways from this season, I would imagine there'd be a lot of players that want to play for Skip going. Then that's with manager of the year type candidate, that kind of clubhouse culture, and that the in-house players will sell that message. So hopefully hopefully I'm right about that, and that will help the Marlins out to some degree that it would not have in the previous seasons, and certainly have still. The players are the ones that are on the field, responsible for the wins and losses. So, hopefully some people are just going to be vibing off of that. That the next crop of players that will be looking to take those markets to rebound, those contracts to rebound in Miami, and get those trades done. But on the trade front, then I'm concerned. I was really hoping they'd hit the ground running in the offseason and with some kind of below the fold trades while the market while the big boys, tried to spend for Otani and the other big wanted and go after Bellinger, and while that happened, the Marlins could get that little shortstop, that little catcher there, and just sign people. That was my hope. It's not often how the market operates, but I was hoping to see a fast-moving offseason, and now I'm certainly of the opinion that maybe that's not going to be what takes place. That we'll see these decisions go on into March, like it did with Soler a couple years back. But it's just wrapping up here. First of all, thank you again for coming on and doing this. I know you've probably discussed this many times today on multiple platforms. Anything you want to particularly promote, and any closing thoughts?
Yeah, well, a lot more coverage on fishabonfirst.com, diving into Kevin is in the chat with us tonight, and he's going to look at a handful of candidates to fill Kim's shoes, from 4 of them from outside the organization, and then 1 internal guy to keep an eye on with that. I think our off-season live stream schedule is going to be every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So that's when this Wednesday we'll have our next Fish on First live to dive into that even more, and hopefully get even more clarity as to exactly how all this unfolded to put us in this particular situation that we're in right now. And whenever there is that presser with Bruce Sherman, I guess it would be his most anticipated media address in a while, because I think even during the COVID chaos in 2020, when the team had the outbreak, I think I remember Jeter and Michael Hill doing most of the press with that. You can say this is perhaps his most highly anticipated media availability since taking over the team in the first place, considering reporting strongly suggests that this was his call. This was him not doing the expected thing to keep him around. So we'll have coverage of that and trying to analyze what exactly was going on there and try to challenge what it is that he was thinking there. But otherwise, yeah, we appreciate everybody that tunes into what we do, and especially super subscribers like yourself to keep us going on a whole new level.
But subscribe, folks.
Yeah,
it's worth it.
But it's been, again, grateful to Kim for setting up this season and making it as exciting as it was. She has to be proud of the work that she did, and perhaps that was part of the ultimate breakup is Bruce not valuing it the same way that she did. And I can't blame her, especially when there are a couple other opportunities out there right now. And you would think that even if she wants to take a deep breath and wait until the following offseason, there will be even more openings out there that are equivalent to what she would have been doing right here. So I understand both sides of it, but I still really lean towards Kim's side of this situation, where what she did is really remarkable. And she was so integral in getting them to this point. So it's sad to see her go, but wishing her best of luck out there, and hoping that she doesn't make the Marlins regret too much her departure and haunt them with another team in the future. But there's a decent chance she will. She still has a lot of her career ahead of her, and I kind of worry that that this will be a regrettable step back. So yeah, I'm excited to see how this process plays out, and we will see exactly how desirable this job is across all of baseball. That's the other factor to consider here. Kim was in that very unique position where she was qualified to do that job, but other teams were not willing to take that step and actually bring her in. And all the attempts that she made to be a GM prior to that, it was such a unique situation that this one, it's almost inevitably going to play out a little bit differently, bring in a candidate that's not quite as unique. But whoever that they do bring in, I wish the best of luck to them as well, because this was the first time in 20 years that made the playoffs in a full season. And there's naturally a pretty large segment of both the local audience and then broader that question whether or not baseball really belongs in Miami, and whether or not it can succeed down here just because they haven't had that consistent success. They haven't they haven't had ever built off a playoff season with another playoff season. So yeah, it'd be a shame to kind of fumble post this post playoff berth like honeymoon just due to a transition and to like reset just because of these strange circumstances. Yeah, so best of luck to everybody involved. As disappointing it is that they had to make this change that I don't think was really necessary. Um, I'm still excited to see what comes next because they could go in a lot of different directions.
It's definitely going to be interesting, but I do think one thing is certain. Honeymoon is over. I think they ended it. I think the Marlins ended their honeymoon today, and we're kind of back to business as usual. Wondering what's coming next. Hopefully good things. I won't say too much more. Couldn't really put it better, but certainly thanks to Kim for all she did for the organization, and for and for many other aspiring individuals, women hoping to enter similar organizations in baseball. To say that work must be commended, as well as her work just as an executive. Period. Was certainly something to be admired. Best we've seen in a while, and wish her all the best moving forward. Stuff for me to promote. I mentioned again, I've got a couple of pieces out on Call to the Pen right now. I have a piece dropping with Here's the Pitch tomorrow. And I imagine just many other things will unfold as there's suddenly a lot more Marlins news than I was expecting there to be at this point of October. They'll be coming out over the next couple of weeks. But I'll say goodnight. I'm Shar Millerick, and for Ely Sussman, this was Marlins After Dark, and we'll catch you next time. Go Fish.